Hi, I'm Guy Lawrence, and you are listening to the Guy Lawrence podcast. If you're enjoying this content and you want to find out more and join me and come further down the rabbit hole, make sure you head back to guylawrence.com.au. Awesome, guys. Enjoy the show. AJ, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Guy. It is a delight to be here.
Now, I have a question for you. If you were in Australia, you were at a good old-fashioned Aussie barbecue, and a stranger wandered up to you and asked you what you did for a living, what would you say?
I would say, well, I have a lot of slashes. So I'm a writer slash journalist slash speaker slash human guinea pig. That might be how I answer that.
Yeah, beautiful. And I got to be honest, mate, you, like, from what I've been looking into your work, you definitely have an interesting way at looking at the world.
Well, thank you. So do you. And by the way, this might be a little off topic, but you already made my life better, because when we were emailing with each other and I said I had to switch times for the recording, you said, "No problem, legend." And so instead of saying buddy or mate, you said legend. And I loved it. First of all, it made me feel great. And secondly, do you mind if I adopt that and start using that with friends?
Please take it on, take it on.
I think it's great. It takes it to a new level.
It does, absolutely. I actually have a good friend, Marcus. I'll make sure he listens to this. But when I first met him, he was like the most positive person I've ever met. He's like, "Hey, legend, how are you?" You know, at the moment you're with him, you just feel alive and you feel upbeat straight away, and it just
that's the way I felt.
And it shows the power of communication, doesn't it? Even all the way down to a simple email of, like, there's definitely a transfer of something, of energy and a way we're feeling, and we can forget that there's a person on the other end sometimes, especially, and we just don't even think about it.
Absolutely. Love it. So Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're very welcome. You made my day. So where does this come from? Have you always kind of, all these experiments, all these human guinea pig things that you've done, and I'm itching to touch into a few of them in a sec, but have you always kind of been this kind of way in terms of doing these things, like all the way from childhood, or is it just something?
I think it is a childhood I don't think, I'm not a great athlete. I'm not the best looking person, but I do have one strength, I think, which is curiosity. I really love to learn. So I will read a book on any topic, accounting. Why not? I'm sure there's something interesting there. And I especially like just diving in and living, trying to see the world through someone else's point of view. And that has been the spur for my books.
Yeah, got it. So, what with your curiosity? Let's touch on some of the experiments that you've done over the years, because I mean, there were some I laughed out loud when I first heard them.
Thank you.
I've got to find out. So, what did you start with? And I know, because there's a few that spring to mind. The Year of Living Biblically, you did.
Yes.
There was one trying to be the healthiest person in the world, wasn't it?
Right. That was it. Yep. Yeah. You got two of them.
Yeah.
And
please continue. Maybe rattle a few out that you.
Yeah, let me rattle a few out. Like, that's right. I tried to be the healthiest person alive. I tried to live by all of the rules of the Bible, all 700 of them, for a year. So not just the 10 Commandments, although I tried to do those, but also no wearing clothes made of different kinds of fabric, and no shaving the corners of my beard. I didn't know where the corners were, so I just let the whole thing grow. I did, my most recent one was I went and tried to thank every single person who had even the smallest role in making my morning cup of coffee. So I went around the world and thanked 1,000 people. So the coffee farmer, but the logo designer, the CEO, the truck driver, the guy who made the road for the truck. I did another where I tried to be the most rational person in the world and get rid of all the cognitive biases that we all have in our brain. I outsourced my life. So I hired a team of people in Bangalore, India to do everything for me, like answer my email and answer my phone and argue with my wife for me. That was fun. That was in Tim Ferriss's book. Your listeners might be aware of him. And I did one called Radical Honesty, where it was that was a terrifying experiment where I basically followed this this movement where you say whatever's on your mind. You remove the filter between brain and mouth, which has its delightful parts and its horrifying parts.
Wow. How long did you do that experiment for? Radical
That was
honesty?
about 2 months.
Really?
And yeah, you know, it was this fascinating movement started by a guy in Virginia, a psychologist, and he says that the world will be better if everyone just said what was on their mind. So, I mean, we are talking everything, like, you know, say to your boss that you hate your job, say to your wife that you have fantasies about her sister. Like, if you think it, say it. And it was a fascinating, you know, it was probably the most trying, difficult 2 months of my life because I was constantly offending people. But it was also, there were parts that were wonderful and that did change my life for the better and that I try to take away. So I try to practice like what I call radical positive honesty. Like, you don't have to tell your wife she looks fat in that dress, but there are times that we are thinking something positive and just don't say it because it's not socially acceptable. So, you know, just telling people, like calling your old boss and out of the blue, like that's what I did. And, you know, after 15 years saying, I was just thinking about how much you meant to me and
Oh,
wanted
wow.
to thank you. And, you know, it's awkward because again, it's not sort of it's not the way society usually operates, but I also think it's wonderful. So there are good parts and there are bad parts. I
Totally.
lost a couple of friends, but I gained some others.
Amazing. And doing all these kind of experiments, because we kind of live life on autopilot, really, don't we?
Mm.
It's so easy to fall into the trappings and the regular, almost like the Groundhog Day.
Mm.
But then we still have these options to start to shake it up and actually create something different or change or have that curious mindset.
I love that. I love what you say because I do. That's sort of one of my messages is that I think everyone should try experiments with their lives, and I know that not everyone can, you know, grow a huge beard. You know, I had a book contract, so
Okay.
I was getting paid to do it. But I think there are ways you can experiment with your life that will make it better, and they can be small things. They can be, you know, trying a new toothpaste every month, or going to work a different way, you know, a different route, or biking, and I think that's how humans make their lives better, is trying different things. And yeah, I'm no neuroscientist, but they do talk about these ruts. If you do something the same way, you sort of create a rut in your neural pathways. The phrase is that what fires together wires together. So if you do something the same exact way all the time, you get stuck in this rut, and it's hard to shake up your perception, your perspective. It makes you less creative. So yeah, just trying to mix things up as much as possible. I think makes life more fresh, more interesting, makes you more creative, makes you able to see perspectives better. So yeah, I am sort of an enthusiast.
Totally. No, beautiful. It's if I'm not mistaken, it's called Hebb's Law. And they're like bobsleigh tracks. That's how I imagine it. And you just keep going down it. Next thing you know, you can just run down this thing freely.
Exactly. And there are, you know, I believe everything has pros and cons. And I want to be sure to say that, because I think the world is, the black and white thinking of the world is a real problem, and it's like affected politics. So I will say there are advantages to habits, because some things you do want on autopilot or you'd be exhausted. So I would say, you know, don't abandon all habits, but just be mindful not to get stuck in a rut. and mix up your habits, try new things to see if it makes your life better.
Totally, totally. I want to touch on the, just from what you gained from, because I worked in the health industry for a long time. I was a fitness trainer,
Right.
and then
I knew that, yes.
my company evolved into that. And so I'm really fascinated, because the more I got involved in the industry, the more it opened my eyes to thinking, like, what is actually health and wellness?
Right.
You know, so what did you learn from your experiment of trying to be the healthiest version of yourself possible by following? Was you like just following the dots, like counting calories and measuring how you trained, or like how did you do it?
Right. Well, it started because I guess I was like 40 years old and I got really sick with pneumonia. I just had a terrible immune system. Any disease was welcome in. And my wife, I was in the hospital and my wife was like, you've got to get healthy. I ate terribly. I never exercised. I wasn't traditionally fat. I was more skinny fat. So I looked like a snake that had swallowed a goat, that kind of body. And she said, you've got to get in shape. I don't want to be a widow when I'm 45. So I was like, well, this could be a good excuse for a project. So I said, I'm going to try to revamp every part of my life. So I'm going to try to have the healthiest diet, healthiest exercise, lower stress, try to healthiest sex life, healthiest way to go to the bathroom, which I'm happy to talk about. I actually think it's interesting, and healthiest sleep. So it was every part of my life I tried to revamp. And what I did was I got a board of advisors. So people like you, trainers, I got doctors and scientists, and I just read voraciously and wrote down every piece of advice that I could find. And this list was hundreds of pages, it was dozens of pages, and many of them contradicted each other. So that was a challenge. So, but it was basically, I would try different things. I was a human guinea pig. So I tried a paleo diet. I tried a Mediterranean diet. I tried every workout you could, including the caveman workout in Central Park, where we ran around shirtless and carried logs and threw boulders. And I tried, colonics. I tried anything you can imagine. And at the end, I sort of had a list of takeaways of what I would keep and what I felt did not help my life. And just to give you one overall takeaway, that I think paradoxically, it's unhealthy to be overly obsessed with health, because stress is a big factor. And if you are really like obsessed with getting perfect abs, or if you're obsessed with exercising for 6 hours, if you like it, that's fine. But if you're doing it because you think you need to, 6 hours a day, that's not necessarily healthy. If you're obsessed with eating just the right, like organic, non-GMO asparagus, that can be a problem, because part of health is having a strong social group and being part of a community. And if you are too obsessed, like maybe no one wants to go to dinner with you, like maybe you can't go to a restaurant with your friends because they serve unhealthy food, that's not healthy. There's so much on how having like strong social bonds is important. So going out to dinner with a friend and having a glass of wine can be as healthy as going to the gym. So that was a takeaway that I had, and it made me feel better too, because then you don't have guilt. You don't have to have guilt if you're bonding with friends. That is an important part of health.
I'm so glad you said that, and I saw that so much, and still do, that we get so fixated and obsessed, and it becomes our everything, and we're just constantly trying to make it work, and it's the stress of it all that's driving huge issues, I believe.
Right.
We just came back from Sardinia. We ran a trip to
a blue zone.
We did a longevity tour there.
Oh, great!
And we spent a week living like the elders in the mountains.
That's fun. So you
Yeah.
had a lot of what did you do exactly? You walked up a lot of stairs. I know they have a lot of hills there.
Yeah. There was a lot of walking. There was a lot of communion. It was the people just loved coming together. Like it was massive. Nobody was talking about their diet or what they ate or how far they walked today or how many calories they burned. Like none of that was going on at all,
Mm,
you know. And they were making like the elders, the shepherds, a lot of their diet was actually just this homemade bread that they
mm,
would bake in these ovens the way they've been traditionally doing it for, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years. And then they would eat lard because they would be going out as a
mm.
shepherd all day. And that was
Right.
really what they would take, you know.
That is interesting. Well, I mean, that's also very interesting in terms of diet, because I do believe, uh, I believe in eating non-processed food,
Mm.
but I'm not convinced that there is a certain diet that is the key to health. Like, I don't believe the paleo diet may work for some, it may not work for others. And what's interesting is, yeah, these Sardinians are eating bread, which is like, would be a huge no-no to some modern diet
Totally. It
gurus.
flips everything. It flips everything. And we sat down with this gentleman called Genome, and I think he was 94, and he was bolt upright. His hands were, I've never seen hands like it. They were like, his fingers were like three of mine almost, like he'd been working with his hands his whole life.
Hmm.
And when we were talking to him, he didn't even know what stress was. Like he didn't actually
Mm,
have a concept for it,
right.
you know. And that summed it up right there. It was like,
That's
wow,
great. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, you know,
That's such a huge part.
for sure. I want, before we touch on your new book, Thanks a Thousand, I'd love to literally, I've got to ask you, with the year of living biblically, what happened? I mean, you're walking around, you're growing a beard more every day. I mean, I saw a photo of you. You literally ended up looking like Jesus Christ, walking around with your white
I
robe and
did.
everything.
Absolutely.
What were the lessons gained from trying that experiment?
Well, it was fascinating. I mean, there were many takeaways. I did stop many things at the end of the year. I shaved my beard, as you can see, and I stopped stoning adulterers. I actually did stone some adulterers because that's in the Bible, but I used very small stones, like pebbles. But I put the stones down at the end of the year. But there were many lessons, and I'll just give you a couple. But first, don't take the Bible literally. There are millions of people all over the world, especially in the United States, who say they take the Bible literally, therefore homosexuality is a sin. And my argument was, well, no, you're not taking the Bible literally. If you were taking the Bible literally, you would be doing what I would be doing, like walking around with a beard, stoning adulterers, and avoiding mixed fibers. So don't take the Bible literally. It's got some wonderful wisdom about loving your neighbor, compassion, the golden rule. Like those, I think, are wonderful. But you don't have to follow every little part of the Bible. Other takeaways, well, one was gratitude, which we'll talk about
Yeah.
in a minute. But another was the power of the outer to affect the inner. That was a big lesson. The power of our behavior to affect our thoughts. Because a lot of times people think, oh, I've got to change my mind to change my. But often it's more powerful and effective to change your behavior, and then your thoughts follow. They catch up. It's easy, as someone said, it's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than to think your way into a new way of acting. And I saw this in the Bible because, for instance, the Bible says you cannot lie or covet or gossip. And I'm a journalist and I live in New York City. So you can imagine that is like 80% of my day, those activities. So I had to have a huge moral makeover. And one of the most effective strategies would just be to force myself to pretend to be a good person, to act as if I were kind and compassionate, even though I wasn't feeling it. So I forced myself to go visit a friend in the hospital, even though I hated it. And eventually your mind catches up and says, oh, I'm in the hospital, I'm visiting a friend, I must be compassionate. and you become a little more compassionate. So I have found that to be true in many of my experiments, even one where I tried to be the best husband to my wife, and I forced myself to buy her little presents every day, like a scented soap or whatever. And when I saw myself giving her these presents, it sort of convinced my mind, oh, I must really love my wife if I'm giving her these presents. And it works. It made a difference in the mind. Your mind catches up. So that I found to be a very powerful lesson.
Yeah, I never thought of it like that before. Hey, that's incredible. I guess the key ingredient there, though, is that you've got to want it, right? You've got to really to go against that programming, that automatic pilot that we're doing constantly. If you can just, like you say, put yourself in those situations where you've got to act it.
That's true. Yeah, you're right. You're right. You have to have the motivation to change. But once you have the motivation, this is one of the best strategies for doing it. Instead of trying to think your way into, oh, I'm going to start to be kinder. But what if you're in a terrible mood? So forcing yourself to do the behavior so that your mind catches up.
So you mentioned the word gratitude, and I know you've been on a huge journey, and the word gratitude, I was only saying on a podcast the other day, for me, I used to it almost used to be like a checklist. Am I grateful today? Yes. And I think about the things I'm grateful for, but it never used to sink in. Does that make sense? It was almost like a to-do list where I'd go, right, I've done my gratitude practice and now I'll get on with my day. As opposed to actually feeling gratitude.
Right. Yeah, that is the problem.
That's one of the problems. So talk us through this journey. How did this whole thing come about with you deciding to go and thank 1,000 people and really start to appreciate gratitude for everything that comes your way, you know?
Well, I think it was partly what you said. I knew that I had to be grateful because there is so much research on the benefits of gratitude, how it's, it's good for fighting off depression. It's good for, you heal quicker from surgery if you keep a gratitude journal. And there's studies that, you even eat more healthily and you sleep better when you have a grateful mindset. So I knew how important it was, but like you, I was having trouble. It wasn't sinking in. So I started a gratitude practice at home, where I would try to say a prayer of thanksgiving before every meal. But the trick is, I'm not very religious. So despite my book on the Bible, so I decided to do a secular version where instead of thanking God, I would thank some of the people who helped get my meal to my plate. So I'd say, I'd like to thank the farmer for growing the tomatoes and the woman at the grocery who sold me the tomatoes. And one day my son, who was 10 at the time, said, that's fine, but it's also kind of lame because those people, they can't hear you. They're not in our apartment. If you really cared, you would go and thank them in person. And I thought, well, that is actually a very interesting idea. That could be a book project. And so he earned his supper that night, and I thanked him for it. And I decided to focus on coffee because I love coffee and it's one thing. And I would go around and thank every person who had even the smallest role in making my cup of coffee. And as I said earlier, that turned out to be a tremendous number of people because you realize how interconnected the world is, how we couldn't have coffee without roads. We couldn't have, and roads needs stop signs, so we couldn't have that without the steel. So I went and thanked the steel workers, and it was amazing because you realize these hundreds of people we take for granted in every little thing we do, and it was also good just mentally. It was an amazing way to practice gratitude that helped me shift my perspective from the hundreds of things that go right. It helped me focus on the hundreds of things that go right every day, instead of the 3 or 4 that go wrong. Because humans unfortunately have a built-in negative bias. We are really good at finding those 3 or 4 things that go wrong, which was very helpful, I'm sure, when we were cave people on the savannah and you needed to notice that lion. But it's not good for our mental health. We were built to survive, not to be happy. So so shifting our focus and fighting that negative bias has made a huge difference in my life. And so the book is about that sort of strategies. You don't have to go around the world, but strategies that you can use to make your realize what we should be grateful for.
I love it. So on this journey, what parts of the world did it take you to thank?
Well, I did go to the small farm in Colombia where they grow the beans in South America. And that was interesting. First of all, it was the scariest part of my journey, excuse me, because it was in a tiny mountain town. And was driven on these curvy mountain roads. And every time we went around a hairpin turn, the driver would do the sign of the cross with his, and I thought, I appreciate that, but is there a way to do the sign of the cross, like, while keeping your hands on the wheel? Because just like maybe with your elbows, I don't know. So I was terrified. We got there, and it was a beautiful farm in the mountains, owned by 8 brothers and 1 sister. And this was where I just thought it was very profound to see these beans that would eventually, in like 9 months, be in my coffee. And I thanked them profusely. And they were a little baffled at first, but then they kind of got on board with the project. And they pointed out how many people they require to do their job. They have a machine that sort of takes the skin off of the fruit so that you can get the coffee bean. And that machine is made in Brazil. So they have parts from all over the world as well. And so they got on board with the idea that it does take a world to create a cup of coffee. So I did that. I went to upstate New York. I live in Manhattan, and I went to the reservoir because water is 98.8% of coffee. It's mostly water. So I felt I had to thank the hundreds of people who work at these gigantic reservoirs to provide our water. And you can't believe, the fact that we can turn on a little metal knob and have drinkable water is an astounding fact that I totally take for granted. It is not something that was true for 99% of human history, and it's still not true for billions of people across the world who have to walk hours a day to wells. So just being appreciative of that and of the people who work there, it's not an easy job. Some of them actually, their whole job is walking around the reservoir picking up deer poop so that it doesn't wash into the reservoir. So that's not fun. So they deserve my thanks so that I can sit back and just have a nice cup of water that required 0 effort on my part.
It puts everything into perspective, doesn't it?
It does. Sorry to interrupt, but that brought up one quick image, which is, people say there's people who look at the glass half full and the others who look at the glass half empty. My point to my kids was that might be the wrong perspective. Maybe you should take a step back even further and be astounded that there's water in that glass at all, and that there's clean water and that you didn't have to work for it. So it's not just whether it's half full or half empty, it's the fact that we have water at all that should be, we should be amazed by.
Totally. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, is that, our problems to us are obviously, they're our problems, and no matter how big or small, it can feel like a problem, and it's like,
sure,
no matter where we're at, right? And I think cultivating I almost sounded like Tony Robbins then, saying an attitude of gratitude. But
Well, he's very successful, so.
yeah, exactly. But you know, there's so sometimes, like I was even saying earlier about ticking the boxes, it can be hard to really start to get into that appreciation of gratitude when you're feeling low, when you're feeling stuck, or there's problems going on. What practices do you do on a daily basis, or would you say have found that helped you the most to really get this?
Right. Well, I think, yeah, you're right. The danger is it sort of becomes an automatic ritual, which goes back to what we were saying before. It becomes like a routine. So mixing it up and trying to stretch your mind, I think, are very important. One practice that I wrote about that I found very helpful and seems to have struck a chord, I've gotten a lot of emails. When I'm going to bed, I try to, instead of counting sheep, I count things that I am grateful for. And I do it, but I do it in a structure, so I do it alphabetically. But the trick is I can't do the same ones every night. So I have to be creative. I have to, so A might be the apple pancakes my kids made over the weekend, and B could be the show called Barry on HBO. I don't know if you've seen it. It's fantastic with Henry Winkler. Hilarious. So they don't have to be big things like, that I have water. In fact, I prefer the small things that usually go unnoticed. But this makes you be creative and focus on all the hundreds of little things. And yes, it is a balance, because you don't want to be too optimistic and ignore the problems in your life. And we all have problems. And I always say I happen to be in a good space now mentally, but I know that that's not going to last. That my mental life is cycles. I go, I battled depression over the years, and I'm sure I will in the future. But just having these strategies, I think, will help me cope, and realizing that it's not all black and white. Everything is not a catastrophe. Even if parts of your life are going badly, there are still parts that are going well, and we have to use these strategies to help. And just to give you one more strategy, like the sleep, is sometimes I will take just a minute of my life, and try to list the things that went right in that minute. So, if I'm going to the subway, just listing all the things, the subway didn't crash, I didn't trip falling down the stairs, we have electricity. That's pretty amazing. It's a nice temperature out, or the subway car is heated, all these things that we take for granted, and focus instead on the stench of from the garbage, which, sure, that's there. There are going to be things that are bad, but if you focus on them, that's not going to lead to a happy life.
Yeah, totally. It comes back as well then, doesn't it, to being able to be the observer and catch yourself and just come back to that moment.
I love that. I love that. I mean, I've written about how I don't trust my brain, and I like to babysit my brain, like you say, step back and notice when my brain is acting badly and just focusing on the negative.
Totally. There's a term in neuroscience called metacognition. I'm not sure if you've
I do know it, and I love it. I am a big fan of metacognition.
Yeah, and it's almost, I think, for me, this is what I teach now, because it's almost like the crux of everything. Because if you can start influencing the way you feel emotionally, it's going to change your lens, the way you look at life, whether it's a positive or a negative bias to the things that are going on. And then that's going to have a ramification impact to the choices you make around the way you eat, the way you communicate with people. Like, it all comes back to exactly what you're talking about.
Love that.
It's beautiful. What's your hope for this book, now that you've written it and set it up to the world?
Yeah, I mean, my hope is that people read it and are able to change their. I talk about. I don't know if this will resonate in Australia, but I feel that we all have Yeah, I just hope that it helps give the people these strategies. I talk in the book about how we all have our Mr. Rogers side and our Larry David side. I don't know if you know those
I
in
don't know.
Australia. Well, Mr. Rogers is a kids host who's just so positive and optimistic, and Larry David is this comedian who's just so negative and cynical. And I think there's room for both, but I think a lot of people, their Larry David side, the negative side, is just so strong that you have to make the Mr. Rogers side bulk up and go to the gym, and these exercises will help. I've been enjoying, as part of the book, I decided I would write 1,000 thank you notes to readers of my books and articles. And that has been simultaneously, it's been, honestly a pain in the ass, because that's a lot of thank you notes, pain in the hand, I guess. But more than that, on the other hand, it's been wonderful. I've loved it. It gives me a little dopamine boost. And I learn what resonates with people about my books, because they respond. And it is, I think that's an important lesson, is that gratitude is a two-way street. If it's done correctly, it helps the thanker as much as the thankee, the person getting thanked.
Yeah, totally. No, I love it. I love it, and looking for. Is it on Audible? Just out of curiosity as well.
It is on Audible.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's where I listen to a lot of books myself.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, AJ, I've got a few questions that I ask everyone on the show. And,
absolutely.
And I'd love to get your insight on it. And one is, what's been a low point in your life that you've had, but later in life became a blessing?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, let's see. I would say, one thing I like to remember is that you are a storyteller, so you can take your worst stories and retell them and make them enjoy it, basically laughing at your own troubles. And I find that very healthy. So I remember I've written about all of the humiliations in my life, and I think it makes good copy. It's people can relate. I remember one time I wrote about my first book, where I sent it out to a publisher, and they said they were interested, but they wanted to see a picture of me, the author, and I was like, well, why do you need that? And they said, well, we just want to make sure you don't have two heads, so you can go on a talk show and promote the book. So I sent them a picture, and they called back and said, okay, well, thanks for your interest. We're going to pass. And I'm like, what the hell? I'm not good looking enough to be an author? I thought authors could be ugly. But I actually was able to write about that and tell it, and it sort of inspires people to see, I was rejected in the most humiliating way possible, but I've still made a career as a writer.
Yeah, wow, I love it. If you could have dinner with anyone tonight, from any time frame, anywhere in the world, who would it be, do you think, and why?
That is a great question. I might, there's a lot. I mean, I say I'm curious, so there are so many people. I mean, of course, from doing the Bible book, I'd love to have dinner with Moses or Jesus. That would be interesting. I would love to have dinner. I would love to have dinner with Fred Trump, who is Donald Trump's father. Maybe I could set him up with some other woman before he met Donald Trump's mother, so that we could avoid that part of history. So there are a lot of people who I would love to, and of course, the traditional Einstein and but I'd also like to. I'm also a huge Obama fan, so I would like to encourage him to get more involved. He's sort of stepped back, which is fine. He worked hard, but we need him.
Yeah, fair enough. And last question, what does your morning routine look like?
That's a good question. I Well, I walk to work, which is about 2 miles,
Okay.
because that was one of the big takeaways of the health book. You know, movement, move more, eat less. That really is true. So I move more. I walk to work, and I try to write in the morning. And there's a lot of I did a book, an article once on how to be the most creative person alive. I'm not sure I achieved it, but I got a lot of interesting tips. And one of them was that many people find morning to be a better time for creativity because your mind hasn't been filled with the annoyances of the day. So turning off all email electronics and just spending 2 straight hours, if you can afford it, if you can, you can delay your meetings, spending 2 straight hours just writing or brainstorming or doing whatever creative part of your job is necessary.
Yeah, I find it I'm exactly the same. I'm a morning person now. I get up early. All my good stuff comes before lunch. Like this is, and then things start to slow down quite rapidly.
And you just call it a day.
I call it a day, exactly. And the last thing, is there anything you would like to leave our listeners to ponder on with what we've covered today?
Whatever they find helpful, I would be delighted if they take. I mean, this is interesting. One ritual I have, and this is a little meta, one ritual I have is that after I have a file in my computer called One Thing. And it is after every podcast, listening to a podcast, after reading a book, after going out to dinner with a friend, I go and I try to put one thing, one highlight from that in this file. And it could be a bit of wisdom, a fun fact. It could be, just a strategy. I'm just looking now at the file to see what, some of them are inappropriate jokes that I liked. But some are, this one I liked. I listened to a podcast about Michelangelo, and they talked about how he hated painting the Sistine Chapel because he had a crisis of confidence. He thought he's not a good painter. He's a sculptor. He didn't think of himself as a painter. So there are these letters where he's writing his friend saying, this is a disaster, I'm terrible. And I find that, so inspiring because we all have crises of confidence. And if one of the great works of art, if the painter of the Sistine Chapel can self-doubt, then, forgive yourself for self-doubting a little, but realize it can be delusional. It's like, don't believe your negative hype. So anyway, my meta bit of advice is maybe consider having this file in your computer where you have one thing that you take away from every show or movie or podcast or conversation, because otherwise I find I forget everything. So just focusing on one thing makes it so much more manageable.
That's gold. I love it. You know what's interesting is that when I finish this podcast, my wife will be literally coming back from yoga, right? And she'll straight away to me go, "How was your podcast, honey? And what was your biggest take home from it?" Straight away. Yeah.
There you go. So you've outsourced the one thing file.
No, but to create the file and jot it down is gold, because you're right. We got so much information. We just lose it otherwise.
I find that, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. And for anyone that wants to learn more about your work, your books, where's the best place to send them, AJ?
I have a website, ajjacobs.com, and I'm on Twitter at ajjacobs and Facebook and all that stuff. And I love interacting with readers. So get in touch if anything sparks your interest.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I'll be sure to share this far and wide. I love what you're doing, AJ, and thanks for putting out this wonderful work.
Well, thank you, Guy, for putting out your wonderful work.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. Thanks, AJ.
Thank you.